Should you heel strike or forefoot strike? It started with born to run, then barefoot running, then minimalist running, then maximalist shoes, then the gait analysis industry. And now you got runners spending hundreds of pounds on slow motion treadmill analysis, trying to fix their foot strike. Because the logic seems obvious, heel striking looks wrong. It feels heavy. It looks heavy. It creates a braking force. It must be causing you injuries. Foot striking looks elegant, light, athletic. So the fix is simple. Change how your foot lands. Except the research doesn't really support that. And I think the obsession with foot strike has actually caused more problems than it solved. Because when treating runners, I have never had a single patient whose injury was caused by which part of their foot hit the ground first. And it's a thing nobody talks about because it's less visual and less satisfying than watching someone run in slow motion. Today I want to walk you through what the evidence actually says about running form and injury risk, why the heel strike debate is mostly noise, and what the one metric that generally predicts injury risk actually is. By the end of this, you'll understand your running mechanics better than before. Let's do it. Let's start by looking at what we actually know. The anti-heel strike movement was born from a general observations. Barefoot runners and runners in minimalist shoes tend to forefoot or midfoot strike. They tend to have shorter strike lengths. They tend to have different injury profiles. Therefore, the argument went forefoot strike is more natural and is protective against injury. That logic has a problem because runners choosing minimalist shoes in those early studies were already a self-selected group. They were lighter, more experienced, mechanically efficient to begin with. You were not seeing the effect of foot strike, you were seeing the effect of a certain kind of runner. When researchers actually controlled for that, when they took a broad population of runners and compared heel strikers to forefoot strikers with everything else held equal, the injury rate difference essentially disappeared. A systematic review published in 2020 questioned, and the conclusion was that foot strike pattern alone is not a significant predictor of running injury risk. Irrelevant is that it's a weak signal hiding inside a much stronger one. And here's where it gets interesting. Because the question isn't how your foot lands, the question is what happens in the 250 milliseconds after it lands. That's the window where tissue is loaded, where force travels up the kinetic chain, where injury decisions are made. And during that window, two runners can have completely different experiences, even they're both technically heel strike. One lands slightly in front of the central of mass, their knee is nearly straight, their hip is behind them. All of that force from impact travels directly up a straight line system with nowhere to go. The other heel striker lands with a softer knee. Their foot is closer to under their hips. They absorb the impact through 3 joints instead of 1. That's the thing gait analysis footage often means. Watching the foot, not the force. If foot strike is mostly noise, what's the signal? The single most predictive metric for running injury isn't captured by slowing down video. It's something called vertical loading rate. Let me explain what that is. Every time your foot hits the ground, your body experiences a force. That force has 2 components. There's a magnitude, how much force, and there's a rate, how quickly that force arrives. Vertical loading rate is the rate of the force, and it matters enormously. A slow loading rate means your body has time to absorb and distribute impact through your muscles, your glutes, your quads, your calves. The force travels through a system that was designed to handle it. A fast loading rate means that force arrives before your muscles have time to engage properly. And when muscles can't absorb it, the load goes somewhere else. It goes to the bone, it goes to the cartilage, it goes to the passive structure. The ligaments, the fascia, the tendons. And those structures tolerate high loading rates much less well than muscle does. This is why stress fractures happen. This is why plantar fascia becomes overloaded. This is in part why patellofemoral pain develops. The kneecap experiences rapid repeated loading that the surrounding tissue isn't buffering. Now here's the thing, Vertical loading rate is strongly influenced by foot strike, but it's not determined by it. A 4-foot striker with poor hip mechanics, weak glutes, and a very long strike can have a higher vertical loading rate than a 4-foot striker with a poor hip mechanics, weak glutes, and a very long strike can have a higher vertical loading rate than a heel striker with strong hip stability and a cadence of 175 steps per minute. Which means if you fix someone's foot strike without addressing everything else, you may move the loading rate problem around without solving it. And that's exactly what I've seen happen. Their runner changes to 4-foot striking, their knee pain goes away, their calf starts breaking down. 6 weeks later, they are back in clinic. So if it's not foot strike, what should runners actually focus on? There are 3 things the evidence points to consistently. Let me take you through each one. The first one is cadence. Cadence is the number of steps you take per minute. The average recreation runner runs at somewhere between 155 and 165 steps per minute. And the most common cited optimal range in the research is 170 and 180. And even a modest increase, 5 to 10% above your natural cadence, produces measurable changes in how your body absorbs load. Here's what happens when you increase cadence. Length shortens slightly. That means your foot lands closer to under your center of mass on each step. Your contact time decreases. There's less time in loading phase per step. Your vertical oscillations, how much you bounce up and down, reduces. That means less peak force per strike. And critically, the knee flexion angle at initial contact increases. The knee is slightly more bent when the foot lands. That means more muscular absorptions of impact and less direct load going to the joint. None of that requires changing of foot strike. It happens as natural consequences of running with a slightly higher cadence. The practical way to use this, run with metronome app or a music track to set to your target cadence for 10 to 15 minutes at a time. You are retraining a motor pattern. It takes a few weeks. Don't try to maintain it for an entire run immediately. That's how you swap one injury to another. The second is hip extension. This is the one that consistently surprises runners when I explain it. Most recreation runners have a problem at the back. How your foot lands gets all the attention. At the back, how your hip extends and drives you forward is where most of the propulsion actually comes from, and where a lot of injury risk lay, and that's where the high risk of injury happens. Think about what happens as you push off. If your hip extends well, if your glute fires, your pelvis stays stable, your hip moves into full extension behind you, then you are creating propulsive force efficiently. Your Achilles tendon stores and releases elastic energy the way it was designed to. Your calf isn't working overtime to compensate. Now imagine what happens when that hip extension doesn't happen. Maybe you sit at the desk all day, maybe your hip flexors are tight and inhibiting your glutes. Maybe you have just never been coached on this. Your hip doesn't fully extend, your glute doesn't fully fire, your body tries to get propulsion from somewhere else. It gets it from a calf, from an Achilles, from a plantar fascia, structures that can contribute to propulsion, but were not designed to be primarily engine of it. This is why hip strength work is so central to almost every lower limb running injury. Not because the hip is broken, because when it doesn't do its job, everything downstream pays for it. The practical takeaway here is this: if you have had recurring lower leg or front injuries and nobody has ever assessed your hip extension range or your glute activation during running, that is a significant gap in your treatment. The third is training load management. I've talked about this in the previous video, but it bears repeating here because it sits underneath everything. Gait problems are often not what cause injuries. They are what shift load. The injury happens when the shifted loads exceeds the tissue's capacity. And the most common reason tissue capacity is exceeded isn't mechanics, it's load management. Too much, too soon, not enough recovery. Accumulated fatigue that erodes the margin between what your tissue can handle and what you're asking for. I see runners who have had a gait analysis 3 times, been told about their foot strike, changed their shoes twice, and they keep getting injured. And when I ask them about their training load, the weekly mileage jump, the sleep quality, the recovery between sessions, often the answer is where the real problem is sitting. You can run with imperfect mechanics for years without injury if the load is managed well. You can run with textbook mechanics and break down in 6 weeks if your training exceeds your tissue's capacity. That's not an excuse to ignore mechanics. It's a reason to put mechanics in the right place in the hierarchy. Let me give you something practical. If you have been injured before or you're worried about future injury, here's what I will actually focus. First, your cadence. Download a metronome app, find your current steps per minute on an easy run. If you are below 170, start working towards it gradually. A 5% increase over 4 to 6 weeks is a safe starting point. Second, your hip mobility and glute strength. 2 tests. Test 1 is Thompson steps for hip flexor length. Lie on the table or the edge of the bed. Bring both knees to your chest. Lower one leg down. If the thigh can't reach horizontal or the knee can't bend to 90 degrees without the other leg rising, your hip flexor may be limiting extension. That's fixable with targeted work. Test 2, single leg glute bridge. Single leg glute bridge endurance. Lying on your back, one foot on the floor, one leg extended, bridge up on a single leg and hold. Most people with good glute function can hold 30 to 45 seconds before fatigue. If you drop off at 10 to 15 seconds, there's work to do. Look at a week before any injury you have had. Was there a spike in volume, a race, a long run, a sudden increase in pace? Was your sleep disrupted? Were you coming back from illness? Patterns like that tell you more about your injury risk than any slow motion video. And if you had gait analysis and been told to change your foot strike, that's not necessarily wrong. But I would want you to know what else was assessed at the same time, because foot strike in isolation is a very small lever. Here's what I want you to take away. Running form matters, but the thing that matters most about it isn't captured in a photograph of your foot. It's about how your body managed load across 250 milliseconds of the ground contact, repeated thousands of times per run. The heel strike debate isn't wrong exactly. It's just asking a small question in a situation that requires a bigger one. The biggest question is, does your body absorb impact efficiently? Does your hip extend? Does your cadence keep your stride length in check? Are you loading a tissue progressively and giving it time to adapt? Those are the questions that actually predict injury. And the good news is, they are all things you can work on, not by changing which part of your foot touches the ground first, but by building a body that handles load well. Cadence, hip extension, load management. If you get those 3 things right, your foot stride will take care of itself. If this changed how you think about your running mechanics, share it with your friends and family who has been told to stop heel striking. They deserve to hear the fuller picture. And if you want to go deeper on hip strength for runners specifically, not generic gym exercises, but specific loading progression that translate to running performance, that's the next video in this series. I'll see you later.